the World Nomads Podcast bonus episode. Hear amazing nomads sharing their knowledge, stories and experience of world travel.
Kim, the name of the brand we work for, World Nomads, it's awesome, right? It says what it is on what's inside the can, all right? But people often ask me where the name came from. It came from one of the co-founders, and I'm very happy to say that he joins us live in the studio right now. Simon Monk, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Phil. Nice to be back in.
Well, go on, tell us the story. Where does World Nomads come from? Where's the name?
Back in the early days of the internet, this has been working in the space for a few years, and I wanted to buy a URL that represented the way I saw travel, and I saw myself very much as a world nomad. And looked up the domain, and it was available, so I bought it. You know, it was dead easy in 1996. Didn't have to worry. And I think I ended up buying the one in the UK and the .com, the top-level domain, and a couple of others. And then I set up a blog that was like a travel blog of, here's some photographs and some stories from my trips and things. Didn't really think of it as a business, and that all came a bit later.
How did your blog then compare to the travel blogs that you see now?
Oh, back in the early days, it was like there was no blogging software. Blogs didn't exist actually. This was like travel. I used to send stories in by fax. I seem to remember.
Really?
Yeah, literally by fax. And the rolls of film back in the days of pre-digital photography, you sent the rolls of film by courier. And I think it was published on Telstra Big Pond with a producer called Anna. And, it was all done by fax. Very old school.
That was even MySpace around then? Or are you predating MySpace?
I think that's predating MySpace. And this was just travel, a series of travel stories of a journey through Central America.
The original World Nomad.
Well, you've had to find a new blog name, and that's it, right? Original Nomad. Look, one of the things I like best, Kim, whenever I see Simon, is asking this question. So here we go. Where have you just been, mate?
Well, this year's been a pretty busy travel year, actually. I've just got back from studying Japanese in Japan in a little town called Kanazawa. And before that, like 10 days before that, I got back from a trip to Turkey. And before that, I was travelling through Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, where else? Uzbekistan. So the whole region of Central Asia is quite fascinating for me. It's taken me 30-odd years, but sort of more or less retracing the steps of Marco Polo in pieces. And the weird thing is that when you're a kid, you look at Marco Polo and you think, wow, that's a 13th century journey right across to the other side of the 20 years to China and back. Yeah. And actually, having done it now in pieces, you can quite see how he did it. It's not that hard.
It's not that hard.
Marco Polo's overrated.
I like that. You don't do this for work. This is purely for pleasure.
I think pleasure is the wrong word. I mean, some of my treks and things in the Himalayas, it's the memories are great after you've finished and sort of warmed up again.
Yeah, right.
Dried out.
Can I just jump back to the stands? All right, because they're really popular at the moment. I mean, they're like hot new
We've got an app coming up.
We have an episode coming up as well. So, what was your experience like there?
I'm not quite sure what I expected, to be honest. I've been to Turkey and Iran, and somehow I supposed it was going to be a more desert-like version of that, perhaps, and it was nothing like that at all. Surprisingly, yeah. Travelled, I think, started in Uzbekistan and then went through to Kyrgyzstan, and the whole region is quite green. I mean, even again, if you ignore country borders for a moment, they're sort of modern definitions of a country, and you think of it in regions. I mean, the region just across the Chinese border, on the Stan's side of the Chinese border, is quite lush and green, and they grow strawberries and grapes. Wow. And I was in a little area around the Fergana Valley, which has got its own group of culture and people. Doesn't really get any tourists. Fantastic markets. Everybody's friendly. Everybody's interested in you because nobody goes there, which is wonderful. Yeah. And then you go to some of the other touristic places like Samarkand and those larger cities, and there's slightly more tourists, a few package tourists from Europe and things. But the small villages get nobody, and everybody wants to talk to you and make you welcome. Fantastic hospitality.
Well, I had a chat with you in the corridor last time I saw you around the offices here, and you were telling me about the hospitality there, and you never put your hand in your pocket for days on end.
Yeah, the Fergana Valley was incredible. I mean, the Margillan was the town I spent a few days in, and you'd literally be walking down the street, and they don't take no for an answer. So some schoolboys want to practice their English, so they take you home. They take you to the school, and then they take you home, and then they say, here's the tea, and here's all the other food, and like 90 minutes later, you sort of eventually make your excuses and leave, and 150 metres down the street, there's another family who wants to talk to you, and they invite you in for tea, and so for the first 10 days, and this just goes on, you just didn't spend anything and didn't eat anywhere other than people's houses.
I'm sure we've heard from some of our guests that they've had similar experiences, and there's a lot of trust that goes into that kind of travel too, isn't there?
Well, there is. I mean, if you're completely on your own and you're a female, maybe you'd be a little bit more cautious, not through any malice, just you're inside homes.
Yeah.
But these aren't homes in our sense. They are communal living spaces, often with 5, 6, 7 families, generations and generations of families, often.
Now, you learned Japanese, but did you learn to spell Kyrgyzstan?
Just I can. Having spent 6 months planning it, going.
Yeah, right. I guess I wouldn't know where to start.
No, not enough vowels.
No.
And you were also saying some of the experiences you've had in like the Himalayas. You must have had some close calls. I mean, you've been to lots of sticky situations.
Yeah. I mean, that comes back to the origin, I suppose, of World Nomads. I mean, whenever you travel, invariably there are occurrences of things that are near misses, and the dividing line between a great adventure and something significantly more tragic is actually really small. And most of us, fortunately, end up with great adventure stories, of which I could regale you for endless boat journeys and ferries that are on the verge of capsizing, and in Timor, and rocks sliding down the cliffs in the Himalayas, and they just happen to stop. And and the last treks through Leh and Ladakh. Actually, this was this time last year, and there's a section you go through of high up, and it's full of river valleys and snowmelt and rocks that have stacked up over the generations and stuff. And the guide was going, "We'll be fine as long as it doesn't rain." And then you wake up the next morning, it's pouring with rain, and you just go, "Let's get through here as fast as we can."
You're a family man, so how does all this travel fit in with having children and a wife? You make your choices in life, and you can't have everything. So we made the choice and the decision to travel with our children from when they were 4 months old onwards. Wow.
And you tame your travel a little bit. You don't, you wouldn't do what I did in Kyrgyzstan with a 4-month-old, not responsibly, but you introduce them and then gradually get a little bit more adventurous again. And my kids now, they love travelling and they love adventures. And my eldest son, who's now 16, he's just got back from Tasmania, and he's been to India with the school, and they've been trekking in the Himalayas, and he's like 15, 16 years old. So
what's your top tip for travelling with small kids then? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, it is tough. I mean, very small kids, you have 2 rucksacks and one of them is full of nappies. I mean, it's hard work, really, really hard work. And you look back now, many years later, and you go, man, you must have had some energy. But at the time, just, what are you going to do? Just stay at home and just, so you just get on with it.
What's your top tip for travelling with children when you're in business class, Simon?
You put them with Phil.
Yeah, that's it. I'm on a plane.
Right, tell the story.
And I go, there's Simon. And he's putting his kids in economy next to me and then bugging off up the stairs.
Hey, you didn't, did you?
And he's gone, you'll be right. Phil will look after you.
That's great. Do you always travel business class?
I never used to. These days, not always. It depends on the length of the journey. Yeah. As you get older, if you go on long trips and stuff, you just want to arrive at the other end in one piece, and it's a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, I haven't experienced it internationally, but
my kids have got the view going. Sure, I could afford to stick them in business class, fortunately, but why? At every level, that's wrong in my view. Going, and I could take the $8,000 a ticket and donate it to charity, or my kids can go in business class. That's an easy decision for me. And I look at my other, my kids and going. So if I buy them business class tickets and then eventually they leave home aged 19, they're going to They're going to go straight back into economy because no 19-year-old can or should be able to afford business class. Going, it's just I think the first time I travelled business class was when I was 43. I went going, go figure.
Yeah, you've earned your right. Sure. Yeah. I love that. Did you look after them?
They were fine. They were great. I mean, obviously they've been travelling since they were very young, and they were early teens at that stage. It was a few years ago. Yeah. They were very, looked after themselves beautifully, and they had plenty of room, watched all the movies they want, settled down for sleep. It was the easiest gig I've ever had.
I would have given anything to see your face. That's just a classic story. Classic story.
But look, nice segue there as well. What could you do with $8,000 per ticket? Give it to a charity. You also started, for me, which is one of the most meaningful parts of working here at World Nomads, and that's the Footprints Network and that charitable arm that we do there. How did that come about?
The sort of physical origin of Footprints was the tsunami in 2004. That was the impetus that World Nomads was not actually that old, a couple of years old by then. And you looked at this tsunami, and just out of nowhere, this wave wipes out, 250,000 people, and you go, what can we do? Everybody was asking themselves, what can we do? And, standing in the shower one day and said, well, what happens if we added $2 to the transaction and sort of, help the rebuild effort? That was the sort of naive view at the time. So we did. We sort of coded it in about a day and launched it the day after, and without any great thought. I'm trying to remember. I think we walked down to the local office here and got licenses, like fundraising licenses, and that was about as far as it went. There was no great plan, and then we looked at it, and it was really interesting. We'd raised like $40,000 in 6 weeks just from these tiny micro donations, and then you looked at that and going, "Wow, that's really interesting." And then we sort of kept on developing it and building it and making it project based and trying to connect our customers much more closely to the projects that they actually choose to donate to. Yeah. But the philosophical origin of it is, I've been in so many places where these people are beautifully hospitable, and they've often got very little. I was just telling you, I came back from Leh and Ladakh, and I was walking through a field on one of the first days, and there was a family, a couple of old grandparents working in this field harvesting rice, and they were having their lunch, and they insisted that you sit down and have their lunch of dal and rice with them in the field. And for them, I guess we were the entertainment of the day. Yeah. But they shared what they had, and they certainly wouldn't accept any payment for it. That giving and human sense of connection stays with you, and it's not a one-off. That's just one recent example. But I've been in the jungles of Borneo, or I've been in Central Asia, or I've been in the Himalayas, or I've been in South America, and most people in most parts of the world have this sort of connection with other people.
Yeah. And
that hospitality, there's an obligation that's broader than just the individuals involved.
You were a traveller to start with, but when did you realise that it was, like your total passion? Yeah,
that's a strange one. You just, you've got forks in your life path, I suppose. And when I was travelling around Asia, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, for quite a significant period of time, a couple of years, I suppose. And the experiences that I was getting at the time were quite unique. And you knew somewhere in the future that was going to be valuable and important, but you couldn't predict where it was going to go or what it was going to be. You just knew it was going to be really, really, really important. And it was. I think Steve Jobs once said you can always connect the dots, but only looking backwards. And you just have to trust your instincts, and if something feels right, follow it. And we did.
One of my favourite Richard Branson quotes is, say that you can do it and then learn really quickly.
Yeah, quite. Yeah. The naivety, of course, when you set up a business is you don't know 99.5% of what you actually need to know.
Yeah.
Except you don't know what you don't need to know. You just think it's going to work. And you just make it up as you go along. And you make heaps of mistakes. And if you're lucky, you make enough successes and enough wins to get enough of it right to succeed.
So retrospectively then, are you proud of World Nomads?
Yeah, I'm very proud of the brand. That's why I'm still here. That's why I'm having this podcast with you two blokes and sharing what I've learned. I think we've done things differently. We behave differently. We've got different values. We make our money from travel insurance as a business, but we do so, we actually care about people who, our travellers. And that, most travellers, fortunately, don't see what we see. And it's quite confronting. I've travelled over 30 or 40 years, and you see that the troubles that occur to people, they're often of a quite serious nature, and it could have been you.
I like to call it a lifestyle brand that sells travel insurance, happens to sell travel insurance.
Yep. Yeah, it's what funds what we do.
Yeah.
But you get a sense of the brand and the people behind the brand, and all the things that we do that are non-travel insurance related, footprints, scholarships, podcasts. We actually care about the world that we live in and the way people travel through it.
Hey, how many do you keep count? Do you know how many countries you've been to?
I started keeping a list more out of curiosity, I suppose, and it's not that high. It's about 70, I think.
Okay, but you've done them well.
Sorry, not that high.
No, but 70 is not.
Do you have a favourite of the 70 that you've been to?
Not a favourite, but there are countries that I've returned to repeatedly, which is probably why I haven't travelled to more than 70. When you first go to a country, you barely scratch the surface. You're just going, oh, this is interesting. And you need to go back numerous times on numerous trips to numerous places and meet numerous people to really get under the skin of a country. Iran, been to Iran 3 times. Love Iran. That whole region, Iran, Turkey, Central Asia, fascinating historically, culturally. Yeah. On the one hand, so different to our own cultures, but in some ways not either. In some ways, they are again wonderfully hospitable people. I've been to Japan more times than I can count. Japan's don't just go for the skiing. Really, really explore all the islands.
Do you still have a bucket list though?
I do have a bucket list. I'll have to dig it out. It's actually on my phone. But I think Georgia, which is
okay.
Sort of Georgia, Armenia, down through to Turkey again. That would sort of complement some of the region I'm looking at. But again, if you do a trip, it's not a big trip. I actually want to try and focus on a smaller region these days and sort of go a bit slower.
Yeah.
So the trip this year to the Stans, 8 Stans, I think. Yeah. I've got 6 weeks, so you can either spend a week in each Stan and a few days in each Stan going, or you can pick 3 of them and try and get a sense, and then if you like it, go back and do another part.
You like Georgia and even Turkey a bit. I mean, does the political climate of a country worry you? Do you bother about that?
Yeah. I'm about to get on a plane to Mexico with my sons, and you can't ignore what's going on. You need to be you would be wise to be aware of what's going on in the country politically. From a cultural perspective, you've got the whole drugs issues and the gang issues in Mexico, the level of corruption through the government to the police force. That might be politically incorrect to say so, but such is life. Having said that, I was really cautious going through Central Asia. Read all the World Nomads advice about what to look out for. Didn't find any of it, but that's okay. It's better to go forewarned and forearmed and be cautious than run into trouble through ignorance. When I was much younger, I was travelling through North Africa, particularly through Algeria when it was about to descend into civil war. I'd read nothing, didn't really understand any of the politics, and I was actually lucky to get out of that one alive, I think. That's when I was 24. Yeah.
Have you ever had to put a claim in?
Yes, once, a long time ago. The only place...
Did we pay it?
No, it wasn't for us. It was this was pre-World Nomads. This is going back to early 90s, I suppose. And only time I've ever lost anything. Physically, I've come close, I suppose. I've had all sorts of accidents and things where I never actually needed to call on the travel insurance, but by God, I was pleased I had it. Yeah. But the only time I've ever made a claim was for a camera that got nicked in Bolivia, of all places. On the one hand, you just shrug. It's just an item. You lose your rolls of film and all the things that were in the bag, but it's just a physical item. Yeah. But the near misses. I passed out in Guatemala just. Again, same trip many years ago, and ended up in hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning getting injections, and they were stitching me up. And it could have been really serious. Head was cracked open and there's blood pouring out, and and the eventual bill at the hospital was negligible. But if it had turned into anything more serious, you would have wanted to be evacuated home. Yeah. And that's when you're going, thank God I've got travel insurance. Yeah. Never needed it. Not actually needed to use it, but and you'd be insane not to. Anybody who says I've been travelling for 20 years and nothing's ever happened to me should sit on our side of the fence and see what happens to people. There's just because something's never happened doesn't mean it won't happen, and just because you can't imagine what's going to happen. Everybody talks about the proverbial bus crash. It's never the bus crash. It's the most bizarre and obscure things that nobody ever imagines. A couple of years ago, Phil, you were telling me about this story in Bali, and there's a girl snorkeling with a boyfriend off Bali, off the coast, as you do when you're travelling around the world, enjoying the tropical seas. And lo and behold, she got out into the dinghy after the end of the snorkel, and voomp, there was a flying fish with a big spike straight through her lung. Oh! Wrong time, wrong place.
Did she die?
No, but it was expensive.
It's expensive, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, you think of this flying fish, and the body of the fish is, I don't know, 12 to 20 kilos, and it's got this big long spike on the front, and it's travelling at speed, and it just happened to leap out of the water. I don't know who was more surprised, the girl or the fish. But
yeah, you're right. You couldn't...
couldn't make it up if you tried.
No, exactly. Oh, my goodness.
Endless stories like that.
Yeah.
Are there any, though, and I mean, that's an amazing story, but you must have been moved by some of the other stories.
Yeah, so some of the ones that are, you know, this is what we can't really talk about. There are things that really affect you personally, and they're really serious. And we've all got families and friends, and by God, you wouldn't want that to happen to you.
That's why we have a chill-out room for the staff.
Yeah, our emergency department, I couldn't do their job.
Look, I think we've been talking about coverage and insurance, so you've got your headphones on. I think we might have to play this, Kim. Are you all right? Because, you know, it's a very heavily regulated business, travel insurance, all right? And we have to make disclaimers when we've been talking about things. So let's see if we can get this one away.
This information is only a brief summary. Read the full policy wording very carefully. Visit worldnomads.com, that's all you need to do. It's general advice and it may not be right for you. Read the full policy, it really won't take long at worldnomads.com.
The disclaimer album that comes out next year.
Don't ask me how I got that through compliance, but I did, all right?
Like, which other travel insurance company in the world would have a disclaimer like that?
No.
World Nomads.
Oh, that's
Great
fantastic.
to chat.
Oh, yeah, fantastic.
Thanks for coming in, Simon. Look, if you can think of an amazing nomad that we should be speaking to, then drop us a line on podcast@worldnomads.com.
Now, you can download the episodes from iTunes or the Google Podcast app, or ask Alexa and Google Home to play the World Nomads Podcast.
Bye.
Amazing nomads. Be inspired.